Hi, this is Prashant Bharadwaj. In this short module, we will look at the MRP table and the simple logic behind MRP. We have now understood what a bill of materials is. So this particular item is one of the items in the bill of materials. So first we will look at how the MRP table and the logic works in one MRP table. So this particular 6 rows from gross requirements to planned order releases, these 6 rows are only for this particular item, which has the alphanumeric code XYZ871, and the description of that item is desktop. So obviously the whole bill of materials is for a desk. Where did we get the inventory on hand of 47? It is from the inventory master file or the inventory records file. Know what the lot size is. We had talked about lot size earlier. It is 230 FOQ. We also discussed what FOQ is. It's fixed order quantity. The lead time is 2 weeks for this particular product. Safety stock, I have said here, if any. Some items there may be no safety stock at all, but for this item you have a safety stock of 50. The last input for MRP is the master production schedule. Typically for the end item you would have received the gross requirement from the master production schedule, but if you go to the next slide here, I have given the calculations, how to do the calculations for all of these 6 rows from gross requirements to planned order releases. So for end items, where do you get the gross requirements from? It is from the master production schedule typically, but for all component items it is obtained by the planned order releases of the parent items. This will become more obvious soon. Now let's go back and fill out these cells here. We have a planning horizon of 8 weeks, and the gross requirements during these 8 weeks are 150 in week 1, 120 in week 4, 150 in week 6, 120 in week 7. We will see how to obtain that in a few minutes. Now we have a scheduled receipts of 230 here. What do you mean by scheduled receipts? Let's assume that this is April and this is May. Now something that is scheduled to be received or scheduled to arrive from a supplier in the first week of April, when do you think it would be ordered? Look at the lead time, 2 weeks. So it should have been ordered 3rd week of March. But we don't have any place to depict 3rd week of March here, because in our planning horizon that would be -2, 2 weeks before. But we don't want to discount the arrival or the receipt of this 230, because when you're planning how much to produce, when to produce, you definitely need to take care of what is supposed to be arriving since you have ordered for these items. So 230 units were ordered 2 weeks before, and that is arriving now. That is scheduled to arrive in week number 1 of our current planning horizon. Would you have scheduled receipts in week 2? If you ordered something in the last week of March in this example, you would have a scheduled receipts in week 2, but in our example that is 0. So let me repeat, the definition of scheduled receipts is something that was ordered before today that will be arriving in this planning horizon. Listen to that again. Scheduled receipts is something that was ordered or started production of before today, but it is being completed or being received in this particular planning horizon. If that is the definition, there is no way you can have scheduled receipts in all these weeks. Why? Because for you to receive something in 3, you should order it in week 1, because the lead time is 2 weeks. And the definition of scheduled receipts is something that was ordered before this planning horizon. So in many instances you may not have any scheduled receipts, and in some instances you may have scheduled receipts in some weeks. Now the 3rd row, projected on hand. This is basically my inventory. So when you come to week 1, you have 47 to start with. You're receiving 230. So together you have 230 plus 47, 277 units. But you have to use 150 of those. So if you do the math, 47 plus 230 minus 150, you will end up with 127. So you will have at the end of week 1, 127 units in inventory. So do you have any net requirements? So do you need anything? Net requirements is the quantity that you would need. Now look at the safety stock. It is 50. So which means you got to have a minimum inventory of 50. How much are you going to have here at the end of week 1? 127. So there is absolutely no net requirement. If there is no net requirement, do you plan to receive anything? No. That is what planned receipts mean. Do you plan to receive anything? Week 2 and week 3, there is absolutely no gross requirements, no scheduled receipts. So this inventory of 127 gets carried forward. No net requirements, no planned receipts. When you come into week 4, you come in with 127 in inventory. Is that enough to meet the gross requirements? Absolutely. You have 7 units more than what you need. However, is there a net requirement here? The first instinct is to say no, because you have more than what you need. However, if you don't do anything, you will end up with 7 units here. Is that acceptable? No, because the inventory has to be at least 50. So you have a net requirement. How much net requirement? What is the minimum you need? You need a minimum of 43. Why? If I get 43, add that to 127, the total will be 170. Minus 120 would be 50. So that is the minimum I should have in inventory. The projected on hand should not go below 50. Now you may ask a question. Hey, how come you had 47 to start with? That is the whole idea of safety stock. When you're planning, you need to have at least 50. But when you are executing, in reality, you may have to sometimes dig into that safety stock. Use some of the safety stock. That is what happened here. That is why you are below 50. But when you're planning, you should plan in such a way that you will be at or above 50. So this 43 denotes the minimum requirement to get up to 50. So if you do the math, 43 plus 127 is 170 minus 120 is 50. But I don't want to put 50 here now. Why? Because what I'm going to receive is not 43. 43 is my net requirement, the minimum that I need. But what am I going to receive? I'm going to receive 230, because in this example I do not have the luxury of receiving 43, because my lot size is 230 FOQ, fixed order quantity. So I received 230. So now 230 is what I received, 127 is what I had on hand, 120 is what I really need. So do the math. 127 plus 230 minus 120 is 237. You could have done that intuitively. You had 7 units more than you needed. You're ordering and receiving 230, so you should have 237. Now the last row, planned order releases. When do you plan to release the order? If your requirement is 230 in week 4, when should you plan to release this order to start making it? 2 weeks in advance. So you have planned order releases of 230 in week 2. So what happens now? In week 2, you start making or you place an order, a purchase order or a production order. That is why the term order. You release that purchase or production order of 230 in week 2, so that this will be done or procured or received in week number 4. Add that to the inventory from the previous week, which makes it 127 plus 230, which is 357, minus the requirement 120, which is 237. This is simply like checkbook balance. 237 Nothing happening here. Nothing. Nothing. Now week number 6, you need 150, you have 237. So if you use up 150 from the 237, you will end up with 87. I'll put it there because it is much more than the safety stock. So no net requirement, no planned receipts. Now if you come to week 7, how much do I need? 120. How much do I have? 87. So I have less than what I need. My goal is to have a net requirement that will bring this to 50 at least. So how much do I need to have as net requirement in order for this to be 50? So you need at least 170, right? 120 plus the safety stock, 170. So how much do you require if we have to get to 170 from 87? Simply 83. 83 plus 87 is 170, minus 120 would be 50. That is the minimum. But that is not what I'm going to put here, because 83 is not what I'm receiving. Again, I'm going to receive another 230. That will make it the inventory equal to 230 plus 87 minus 120, which is 197. And the same 197 you will have in the last week, because there is no other requirement. Finally, this 230 will be ordered in week 5 because the lead time is 2 weeks and it has to be received in week 7. Now these are the purchase orders or the production orders sent depending upon whether this item is produced in-house or procured from a supplier. This is the simple logic of MRP. Now, if there is a child of this item, the gross requirement of that child is obtained from the planned order releases that you see here in weeks 2 and 5. I want you to understand that MRP tells you how much to produce and when to produce based on the gross requirements and all the other factors like lot size, lead time, safety stock, inventory on hand, etc. If you look at this, 150 plus 120 plus 150 plus 120, how much is that? 540. How much am I producing? 460. Now, do you see an obvious relationship between the gross requirements and the planned order releases? You don't. That is the role of MRP, to figure out how much to produce and when to produce. Now if you go here, if you are a formula type person, I taught you in the previous slide how to do it intuitively, but if you want to use the formulae, you should be able to get the same answers and following this particular methodology. Thank you.